I don't think there really is a strategy as such at this point. It's escalatory rhetoric, but hard to see from this vantage point how he could really make use of those words, put those into action. You can't really contain or contest the space with the regime in terms of a domestic uh, operation that the regime undertakes. The US could use firepower, but air power rather. Not really clear what that would do. And it's clear that the regime has no intention of backing off.
Good evening. Tensions between Tehran and the United States have reignited once again thanks to the ongoing protests in Iran. Demonstrations began on Sunday, were triggered by the country's dwindling economy, with at least 6 people reported killed on Thursday, yesterday. President Trump responded to the news by warning that Washington will come to their rescue if Iranian authorities kill civilians. Tehran has responded, saying that any action would make US bases in the area legitimate targets. Earlier, I spoke to Emily Thornberry, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who warned that the West should be careful when considering intervention.
When a Western country gets involved in another, you have to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. What does success look like? And how can you make sure that you are successful? Because you might be able to intervene and in the short term think that you are, this is great, we're achieving change, but then, 5 months down the track, 6 months down the track, there is chaos. And there continues to be chaos. And then 5 years down the track, there's chaos. And 10 years there's down. Too often we have seen Western intervention, particularly in this part of the world, without a proper plan as to what success is going to look like and how we're going to extricate ourselves.
Well, let's hear now from Ambassador Barbara Leaf, who served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs under Joe Biden's administration. Ambassador, good evening.
Hello. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I mean, it's a very unstable New Year in Iran.
Yes, it is.
What do you make of the protests this week?
So on the one hand, it's really not surprising at all. There have been increasing pressures, really on the backs, on the shoulders of the public, steeply rising inflation, a terrible water shortage. Actually, not water shortage; it's a water crisis of epic proportions, and a rapidly devaluing currency. And this has brought people out on the streets, not just in Tehran, but in a number of towns and cities across the country.
And in terms of the regime's response, we have seen 6 people killed. Are you expecting, from what's happened previously, a more brutal crackdown, or is the regime weakened and destabilised by these protests?
Look, I absolutely expect modulating and escalating violence by the regime. That is the classic playbook that the regime has always turned to, a combination of inducements, but also violence against the protesters. And there is a certain sturdiness and resilience to this regime that has managed to surmount previous such escalations and protests. So I don't expect it to take a different stance this time either.
You don't think that because they've been weakened by the past military action, or because of the sort of range of crises that they're facing, the range of challenges, that the protesters might have more success this time than in the past?
No, it's entirely difficult. It's entirely impossible to forecast where this goes or how far it goes. There have been cycles of protest, of really large, wide-scale protests in the recent past, which the regime has managed to survive, and I don't expect it to back off this time either, notwithstanding the drubbing that it took in June.
The Ayatollah is aging, and there has been speculation about his health. Could that be a factor here?
The supreme leader is 86. He has widely been understood to be suffering from cancer and a variety of other ills, but I would expect him to stick to his guns literally and figuratively.
Right, well, let's talk about guns, because the US President Donald Trump has put on social media that he is locked and loaded and ready to go. What do you make of his comments there? What do you think the strategy is?
I don't think there really is a strategy as such at this point. It's escalatory rhetoric, but hard to see from this vantage point how he could really make use of those words, put those into action. You can't really contain or contest the space with the regime in terms of a domestic operation that the regime undertakes. The U.S. could use firepower, but air power rather. Not really clear what that would do. And it's clear that the regime has no intention of backing off.
When you look at past interventions by the US, I'm thinking Iraq, of course, but also Syria, it's really unleashed chaos. What should the strategy be, the planning be, to avoid a similar scenario panning out here in Iran?
So I think the first rule of regime change, or anybody who thinks about regime change, is it's very easy to change, relatively easy to change a regime, to destroy a regime. It's quite another thing to create something in its place, or to create something that you want in its place. And I think Iran's own long history of interventions, not just by the West, but other powers, would indicate to me that the regime will fight and will assume that it's got a certain set of advantages on its side. Not only the fact that the U.S.'s own history in the region has weighs against it, the U.S. public is not likely to be up for an intervention that takes even U.S. Air Force planes into the fray. So I don't find it myself credible that we will actually use military force in a domestic situation like this where there's not a threat to the U.S.
So if you were to predict, based on past history, how this is going to pan out in the next few weeks and months, it will be a sort of simmering instability in the region, but nothing more than that.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't try to predict it. Look, there are unbelievable pressures now mounting on this regime, and they have no way out, including, as I said, as a response to this really terrible uh, prospect of a water crisis that deepens and widens with no clear way out. They have no economic policies to address the shortages, to address the escalating inflation. The things that they might do, the approaches that they might do, they will not do under pressure, rhetorical pressure from the United States, and that would be to find a way back to the negotiating table on nuclear issues, which might give them relief from the U.S. sanctions.
So, I mean, it is perhaps far-fetched, but it's not impossible that the protesters who dream of the regime finally, after, nearly half a century, finally losing its grip on power, or a return of the monarchy, then it might be far-fetched, but it's not entirely out of the question, is it?
No, I would say it's not far-fetched and it's not impossible by any means. Look, the history of such regimes is that they look resilient and they look strong. And then suddenly, under the right set of circumstances, both from the street and also wider economic problems, etc., even external pressure, that strength really is revealed as brittleness and
Right.
things crack. But that's a hard one to predict.
Indeed. Well, Ambassador Barbara Leaf, thank you very much for joining us so
Thank
early in the new year to talk about this unfolding story. Let's turn now to Negar Montazabi, who's an Iranian-American journalist and editor and host of the Iran podcast. Good evening, Negar.
Sure. So these protests started last week in the heart of Tehran's Grand Bazaar by merchants and shop owners in the form of strikes, closing down of shops, and then taking to the streets in protest. This is in Tehran, the capital. And then they spread across the country to dozens of cities. In some cities, it's gotten really violent. The repression of security forces has been deadly. The number is growing, it's coming. But then at the same time, we also see sort of the administration, the president, who is a moderate in the Iranian political structure, trying to address the protests. They've met with some of the leaders of the protests, at least in Tehran, for the bazaar. They've made some economic promises. So I think they're trying to moderate this without the kind of violence that we've seen in the past that from security forces that just adds fuel to the fire. So far, it hasn't been successful. But we also see sort of a calming, at least in Tehran, the capital, but the protests still continue in many other cities across the country. So It
And
can
how,
get more severe or continue as is or sort of be tempered.
well, how does it compare with the Masa Amini protests about women's rights in September 2024? Does it feel much bigger, much more explosive than that?
It's not as big yet. I haven't seen any images that suggest larger crowds. It is the largest protest since then, so it's serious. We're taking it serious, of course, but the nature of these are also very different. The spark was a change in the value of the Iranian currency towards the dollar, a specific value that would impact certain shop owners and business owners in the middle class. And then it spread to other cities, various different classes and demographics. But it doesn't have sort of that women and feminist core. So it's very different in nature. But these protests also are not, they don't stay very compartmentalized. People keep coming to the street with grievances that haven't been addressed in the past. So these are always, if whatever is the spark, they turn into economic, political, social grievances that the government just didn't want or can't address. And
Right.
they just keep piling. And that's why people keep coming back to the street.
Just very briefly, how might Iranians view this intervention that has been threatened by America, saying America's locked and loaded, ready to go to rescue the protesters? How might people there see it?
I'm confused. If you ask me how exactly can the US Army, yes, the world's mightiest army in human history, but how exactly can it help peaceful protesters on the street? Are we going to start shooting at the protesters from both sides? The regime is doing one side and the US the other side, because it's going to be the Iranian people who will be paying the price of any form of conflict or war, military intervention coming into the country. So I haven't seen a lot of people welcome it. Yes, some feel at their wits' end and they're like, just come and get it done with whatever the price. But I think if you think about this deeply, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And what we've seen as far as precedent in the region is that that form of military intervention, whatever the promised nation building, regime change, is just going to bring more chaos, civil wars, and decades of terrorism and instability to everyone in the
Yeah.
neighborhood. It doesn't stay contained to one country.
Negar Montazabi, thank you very much for joining us.